My name is William Garrett. I'm 51 years old, and I've spent the last 23 years as a senior ranger for the Appalachian Forest Service in Virginia. Before that, I was a state police officer for 12 years. I've investigated 47 murders. I've seen the worst things people can do to each other. I didn't believe in monsters. I grew up in Wise County, deep in coal country. My father worked the mines until his lungs gave out. I watched men disappear into the earth every day and come back covered in black dust. You learn early in the mountains that danger is real, but it's the kind you can understand. Cave-ins, equipment failure, bad decisions. These things make sense. When I joined the Forest Service, I thought I was leaving the darkness behind. Rangers handle wildlife, manage land, protect people from nature's actual dangers. I was good at it. I was trained to see patterns, to notice what didn't fit. That training kept people safe. Until November 1997. Hellfire Hollow sits in the remote section of Lee County, about 12 miles from the nearest town. It's called that because of the coal seams burning underground, have been for over 100 years. When you hike into that hollow on the right day, you see smoke and flames coming straight out of the hillside. The ground is hot under your feet in places. The native people who lived there centuries ago called it the place where earth breathes fire. They didn't stay. The mining companies came through in the 1920s and dug everything they could find. They left behind unstable ground, toxic water, and abandoned structures falling back into the earth. The people who still live there are stubborn. The Marlowe family had been in that hollow for 3 generations. They raised sheep and goats on what little flat land existed. They kept to themselves. I ran the Cumberland Gap Ranger Station, about 18 miles from Hellfire Hollow, by road. It was a small operation. Just me, Deputy Ranger Thomas Foster, who'd been with us for 8 years, Rebecca Caldwell with 6 years of experience, and administrative support. We covered a lot of territory. Our 2 pickup trucks spent more time on mountain roads than anywhere else. I had a scar across my right temple from a shooting incident in 1982. That bullet missed by 3 inches. After 35 years, I still noticed when people saw that scar. It made me look careful, which I was. November 1st came cold that year. Unusual. The weather turned fast, dropping 30 degrees in a single night. The kind of early freeze that catches animals off guard. The kind that makes people nervous. Thomas radioed in on November 3rd. Got a call from the Marlowe property. Something killed their livestock. I grabbed my field notebook and camera. How bad? They said 13 animals. Sheep and goats. That was significant. A predator, coyote, bear, wild dog pack. Doesn't kill 13 animals in one night unless it's panicked or sick. Natural predators kill what they need. Excess killing meant something was wrong with the killer. When Thomas and I got there, the Marlowe house sat about 200 yards off the dirt road. It was a small, weathered structure with smoke coming from the chimney. The barn was behind it, and past that, the grazing area sloped upward in toward harvest. Mr. Marlowe was waiting outside. He was a thin man, probably late 60s, with the kind of permanent frown you get from 50 years of hard living. His wife stood behind him, younger, with fear in her eyes that went beyond normal livestock loss. "Show us," I said. The animals were in a small pen, already starting to decompose. What I saw made me stop thinking about natural predators immediately. All 13 animals, sheep and goats mixed, lay in careful arrangement, not scattered, arranged, and they hadn't been torn open. The hide was intact on every single one, but the insides had been removed, cleanly, surgically, no blood splatter, no scattered organs, nothing. The bodies were hollow, like empty bags. Who did this? I asked, though I already knew nobody human had. Thomas crouched down, studying the wounds. "These marks," he said quietly. "These aren't claw marks from anything I've ever seen." The cuts were precise. The wound edges showed what looked like multiple fingers or appendages, but the pattern was wrong. The spacing was too wide, the depth inconsistent, and the animals had been positioned post-mortem, arranged side by side in perfect rows. Mrs. Marlowe spoke for the first time. "We saw it." I looked at her. "Saw what?" "The thing that did it. Moving in the dark, it walked like a person, but wrong. The joints bent different, and it was wearing something. Looked like," she struggled for words, "like it was wearing skin, human skin, but it didn't fit right. I felt something cold move down my spine. Not fear, recognition. I hadn't thought about the Morgan case in years. The Morgan case was from 1975. I was 29 years old, newly promoted to homicide detective with the state police. A young woman named Sarah Morgan had gone missing from a cabin near Hellfire Hollow. 3 days later, her body was found partially decomposed in a ravine. The official cause of death was animal predation. I never believed it. Sarah's body was missing its skin. The skin, or most of it, was found torn to pieces about 50 yards away. The state medical examiner said a bear had done it. I said no. I'd never seen a bear attack that specific, that precise. A bear kills fast and eats what's in front of it. A bear doesn't carefully remove skin and abandon the rest. I collected evidence. Found fibers that didn't match animal hair. Found marks on bone that looked deliberate, surgical. Found remnants of something that looked like stitching. The evidence was incoherent. Didn't lead anywhere. After 6 months, the case went cold. After a year, I stopped working it on my own time. After 5 years, I stopped thinking about it. Now I was standing in front of 13 carefully arranged animals and a woman describing something that wore human skin like a costume. I called the state police. They sent me back their report on Sarah Morgan. Then I did something I'd been trained to do but never wanted to do. I looked at the other cases. Once you start looking for a pattern, you see it everywhere. Or maybe it was always there, and everyone just refused to see it. 1942. A family of 4 disappeared from Hellfire Hollow. 3 weeks later, hunters found the body of the father, partially decomposed. Reports said animal attack. 1956. A hunter went missing. Found 3 months later, remains too decomposed to determine cause of death, but witnesses described finding something wrong with the scene. 1967. A young man disappeared. His parents found him in a cave system, dead, with injuries that made no sense. 1975. Sarah Morgan. 1985. A hiker reported seeing something in the hollow that terrified her. She left the region immediately and never came back. No official incident, but the ranger logs noted her statement about something that wasn't quite right. And now, 1997, right on schedule. The pattern was unmistakable. Something happened in Hellfire Hollow roughly every 8 to 10 years. And it always involved skin. Thomas helped me take tissue samples from the dead animals. The cells were degraded in a way I'd never seen before. Fresh but dying, like something from the edge of death. I sent everything to the state lab with a rush order and a note that said Priority Criminal Investigation. The second livestock death happened 48 hours later. I was at the ranger station when Thomas radioed in. "Will, we got another one. Same location, same pattern. Something killed 5 more animals in the Marlowe South pasture." I grabbed my rifle. "I'm heading out now." "Will, there's something else." Mr. Marlowe said he heard it. Whatever it is, it made a sound. He said it sounded like voices. Like someone talking, but the voices were layered. Multiple voices at once. Multiple voices. One creature. One body. I drove out to Hellfire Hollow alone that night. Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe I was too caught up in the pattern, in the 22-year-old case that had never let me go. But I needed to see the second scene before evidence degraded. The night was clear and cold. Stars covered the sky like scattered diamonds. The kind of night where you can see a long distance if you know where to look. I parked off the road and hiked up to the pasture with my rifle and flashlight. The animals were arranged again, 5 this time. Same precision, same removal of internal organs, same impossible accuracy. I was photographing the scene when I heard it. Movement in the darkness beyond the reach of my flashlight. Deliberate. Not running, walking. The sound of joints bending in directions that shouldn't bend. I turned the flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught something at the edge of the light. Humanoid. Roughly man-shaped, but the proportions were all wrong. The legs bent backward at the knees. The arms hung too low. And covering the thing completely was fabric. Human skin stitched together in a grotesque patchwork. Different colors. Different textures. Different people's faces visible underneath the outer layer. Pressed against the inside like masks. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. In 23 years as a lawman, I had never experienced true helplessness. The creature tilted its head. The sound of voices came from where its mouth should be. Not one voice. Multiple voices, speaking in unison, overlapping, creating a horrible chorus. "William," the voices said, "Will Garrett." It knew my name. I fired. The rifle recoiled hard against my shoulder, and the shot echoed across the hollow. The creature didn't fall. The bullet hole in its chest closed immediately, the skin knitting together as I watched. The creature was gone, running backward, joints bending impossibly as it vanished into the trees. I radioed Thomas with shaking hands. "I need backup now." Thomas arrived 20 minutes later. I was still at the scene, still holding my rifle, still trying to convince myself I'd actually seen what I saw. "Will, what happened?" Thomas was young, maybe 35, and he'd never seen me scared before. "The creature is real," I said. "It's not a predator. It's not an animal. It's something else. And it knows who I am." We didn't leave that night. We staked out the property with flashlights and rifles, watching the darkness, waiting for something to come at us that guns couldn't kill. It didn't. Whatever that thing was, it had learned that we were dangerous in a way its prey wasn't. The next morning, I filed an unofficial request to access the entire cold case file for Hellfire Hollow. The police captain owed me a favor from years back, so they gave me access. I spent 3 days reading through decades of incident reports, forensic assessments, and closed investigations. The pattern was absolute. Every 8 to 10 years, people disappeared or died under impossible circumstances. Every incident clustered around Hellfire Hollow. Every incident involved injury patterns that made no sense. Every incident involved missing skin or impossible wounds. Since 1942, at least 17 people had died. 17, and nobody had connected the dots. Rebecca Caldwell found me in the office at 3 a.m, surrounded by files. Will, you need to go home. You need to sleep. How many bodies do you see before you stop calling it coincidence? I asked. What are you talking about? I showed her the files. Showed her the timeline. Showed her the pattern stretching across 55 years. This is insane, she said. There's no creature. There's no monster. There's just a lot of sad incidents over a long time. 17 people, Rebecca. All in the same location. All in the same 8 to 10 year pattern. And all probably with rational explanations. Hiking accidents, wild animal attacks, missing persons who came back or whose families moved on. I understood her skepticism. I would have felt the same way 3 weeks ago. But I had seen the impossible. I had seen something that wore human faces on its body like armor. I'm continuing the investigation, I said, with or without official support. The regional office is already asking questions about your methods, about your obsession with old cases. Will, you need to step back. She was right. I didn't care. For the next 2 weeks, I spent my nights watching Hellfire Hollow, alone, off the books. Thomas didn't know the extent of what I was doing, but he knew enough to cover for me. Rebecca reported my activities to the regional supervisor. The pressure increased, but every night I went back, and I started to understand. The creature wasn't hunting randomly, it was collecting. Every time it killed, it took something, always intact skin, always from a specific location on the victim's body. It was harvesting, building a collection, adding to the grotesque assemblage that covered its body. On November 18th, I finally understood the full horror. I was watching from a ridge overlooking the hollow when the creature emerged from the limestone caves that riddled the area. It wasn't hunting anything living. It was walking upright, moving with that terrible smooth gait, and I could see it more clearly than before. The stitching that held the skins together was crude, but deliberate. The collection of human faces visible underneath the outer layer moved slightly, as if the consciousness trapped inside was still aware, still suffering. 17 people, 17 consciousnesses. Still aware, still trapped, still being worn like a coat by something that had lived in those mountains for over 50 years. I felt something break inside me. I wanted to shoot, to end it. But I already knew bullets wouldn't help, and I was alone. The next morning, I filed an official report recommending that Hellfire Hollow be designated a restricted area for environmental contamination reasons. I knew nobody would approve a restriction based on the truth. But maybe the lie would keep people out. The regional office denied the request. November 23rd. The day I faced the creature directly, I didn't go in with a plan. I went in because I couldn't stop myself. Because every night, the thing wore another's skin and another consciousness was trapped forever. Because I couldn't save Sarah Morgan, and I couldn't accept that. I left my truck at the base of the hollow and hiked in on foot. No radio, no backup signal. Just me, my rifle, and the knowledge that I was walking into something that couldn't be stopped by conventional means. The cave entrance was exactly where the old report said it should be. The air coming out was warm, sulfurous, wrong. I descended into darkness, switching on my flashlight. The cave system was vast. Natural formations everywhere. Crystalline structures that glittered in the light. But there was something else down here. A presence. A wrongness so profound that my entire body reacted against it. My heart raced. My skin crawled. Every instinct screamed at me to run. The creature was waiting. It emerged from deeper in the cave system, and this time I saw it fully, completely, without the shock of surprise. It was roughly humanoid, bipedal, with arms and legs that bent at terrible angles. But the body underneath was not flesh. It was something else, something composite, something assembled from multiple organisms. The collection of human skins covered the creature completely, stitched together in overlapping layers. But I could see underneath. I could see human faces, dozens of them, pressed against the interior. And they were conscious. Their eyes were open. They were aware. The creature made sound again. Multiple voices. Will Garrett, they said. Detective Garrett. Will who couldn't solve Sarah Morgan. Will who let us die. I'm going to stop this, I said. The creature laughed. That sound will never leave me. It was the laughter of 17 dying people, speaking together through one mouth. You can't, it said. I am hellfire. I am the breathing earth. I am the place itself. And I am hungry. Then it moved. The creature was fast. Faster than anything that size should be. It covered the distance between us in a blur of motion. I fired, the rifle bucking hard, the shot deafening in the cave. The bullet passed through flesh and bone, and the creature kept coming. It had appendages I hadn't seen in the darkness. Tentacle-like structures that extended from its body, and they were sharp. I felt one slice through my shoulder, past the ranger uniform, into flesh. Pain exploded through me, bright and immediate. I fell backward, firing again, not aiming, just trying to create space. The creature shrieked with multiple voices. I saw it retreat slightly. That's when Thomas arrived. I don't know how he found me. Later, I realized he'd been following me on my nightly watches, concerned for my safety. He came into that cave with his own rifle, firing at the creature, providing me the moment I needed. Run, he shouted. We didn't run, we fought. 3 more minutes of desperate combat in a cave that felt like the mouth of hell itself. The creature was stronger, faster, nearly impossible to hurt, but it could be hurt. The crystalline fluid that leaked from its wounds was not blood, but it was something. It bled. It could bleed. Thomas fired. Spread with jerky precision. I reloaded and fired again. The creature became desperate, vicious, but we drove it back, deeper into the cave, away from the entrance. Finally, bleeding luminescent blood, it disappeared into passages too small for us to follow. We got out of that cave as fast as our wounded bodies would allow. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. The creature's appendages had infected my wounds with something that resembled septic poison. I nearly died from the infection. Antibiotics worked, but slowly, painfully. The official story was that I encountered a dangerous animal while investigating a missing person case. The creature was classified as an unidentified predatory species. No further investigation was conducted. The Marlowe family was evacuated. Officially, they chose to leave. Unofficially, the Forest Service made it clear that staying was no longer an option. Hellfire Hollow was designated a restricted area. Environmental contamination was cited as the reason. No public access permitted. No unauthorized entry. The restriction exists to this day. I retired the following year. The regional office suggested that my trauma had affected my judgment. They weren't wrong, but they also didn't understand. I'm 74 now, and I don't sleep much. The nightmares are worse than the actual encounter. I see the faces in the creature's skin. I hear the 17 consciousnesses crying out from inside that thing. I wake up remembering that it's still there, still hunting, still collecting. Every 8 to 10 years, someone goes missing in or near Hellfire Hollow. The cases are always closed without resolution. The pattern continues. I've spent the last 25 years documenting everything. Everything I know. Everything I saw. Everyone I lost because I didn't understand fast enough. Sarah Morgan was the first I could have saved. She wasn't the last. If you're reading this and you're thinking about going to Hellfire Hollow, don't. The creature cannot leave that place. Something binds it there. But anything that goes there becomes fair game, becomes part of the collection. And if you ever meet someone whose skin doesn't quite fit, whose movements are smooth in all the wrong ways, whose eyes don't match the rest of their face, leave immediately. Don't ask questions. Don't try to fight. The skin thief is still hungry. And in Hellfire Hollow, it will always hunt. My name is William Garrett, and this is what I witnessed. This is what I survived. This is what nobody believed until it was too late. The creature is still waiting in the caves beneath Hellfire Hollow, still wearing its collection of stolen lives, still patient, because in 8 years, it will be hungry again. My name is Tim Hartman, and for 15 years I've worked as a ranger in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. People ask me sometimes if I miss being a minister. I was one for a decade before I left the church. The truth is, I found God in the forest before I ever found him in a congregation. Out here, in the quiet places where the mountains hold secrets that predate human memory, something made sense to me that never made sense inside stone church walls. Until September 1998, I believed I understood the difference between real and unreal. I thought faith required orthodoxy, and I believed in the material world. I was wrong about both. The Lost Valley Ranger Station sits 6 miles from the valley entrance, tucked into a pocket of the Blue Ridge, where the elevation climbs past 3,000 feet. It's a modest place. Just a log building with a radio, a roof that leaks when rain comes sideways, and enough worn furniture to make you feel like you're sitting in someone's grandfather's basement. That's where I was on the afternoon of September 14th, when Daniel Park walked in with fear written across his face. Daniel was a graduate student from the university, 26 years old, with the kind of nervous energy that comes from spending too much time alone in remote places. His hands shook as he held a thermos of coffee, the kind of shaking that has nothing to do with caffeine. "Something's wrong with the valley," he said. His voice was steady, which was the only thing about him that was. "I've learned that when someone appears frightened but speaks calmly, they're dealing with something real. Fear that pretends to be rational is usually the worst kind." I asked him to sit down and explain. Daniel had been monitoring the stone circle, an ancient formation of about 12 stones arranged in a rough circle, 15 feet across. The origin is unknown. Archaeologists have argued about it for years. Some think it's pre-Columbian. Others say it's natural rock formation. The stone stood there either way, covered in a kind of mineral sheen that caught light at odd angles. "The seismic monitors all failed at the same time," Daniel said. "All 4 of them. And while they were failing, I recorded this." He pulled out a small cassette player from his backpack. I pressed play. At first it was just static and background forest noise. Then something else. A sound that wasn't quite music, but wasn't just random noise either. It had rhythm. It had intention. It sounded like something was trying to speak through the earth itself. "How is that possible?" I asked. "I don't know," Daniel said, "but I heard it when I was there. I wasn't just hearing it through the monitor, it was in the air. And Tim, I felt like something was watching me while I recorded it." That's when I decided we needed to investigate properly. I called Mike Torres, my deputy ranger. Mike had been with me for 7 years, and he was solid, reliable. I also called Sarah Hutchins, our seasonal ranger, and asked Daniel if he'd help us set up proper monitoring equipment. The next morning, we packed the truck, 2 backpacks full of geological survey equipment, thermal imaging cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, recording devices, professional tools for investigating real phenomena, the kind of thing that would help us figure out what was actually happening. As we drove toward the trailhead, I noticed the forest changing. Trees got older, bark turned darker. The light filtering through the canopy seemed dimmer, even though the sun was high. It wasn't an obvious change. It was the kind of thing you notice after you've already been affected by it. Mike glanced at me from the driver's seat. "You feel that?" he asked. I nodded. The air had changed. It felt heavier somehow, like the atmosphere was holding its breath, waiting for something. "Probably just elevation," Mike said, but he didn't sound convinced. We hiked into Lost Valley that afternoon. The trail climbed steadily, switchbacking through old-growth forest. Pine needles crunched under our boots. Somewhere in the distance, a bird was calling, a sound I didn't recognize, high-pitched and repetitive. Daniel said it was unusual. He knew birds. When we reached the stone circle, the light was already getting golden. Late September evening in the mountains comes early. The stones stood exactly where they always stood, patient and enormous. Up close, you could see the mineral composition better. Veins of something crystalline ran through them, catching the last light like veins of silver in gray rock. "Why are the stones so smooth?" Sarah asked, running her hand along one. She was right, they shouldn't have been smooth. Exposed rock in the mountains is usually rough, weathered. These stones had surfaces like something had been rubbing against them for centuries. We set up camp about 50 yards from the circle, in a clearing that offered a good view of everything. We deployed the monitors, placed the electromagnetic field detectors, and set up our recording equipment. The plan was simple: establish baseline readings through the night, see if anything unusual happened, document everything. As the sun dropped behind the mountains, the temperature fell fast. It was a clear night, stars emerging overhead. Crickets started their evening song. Everything felt normal and ancient and peaceful. Everything except the subtle wrongness that none of us could quite name. The first unusual reading came at 11:47 p.m. Mike was monitoring the instruments while Sarah dozed against a tree. Daniel had gone down to the stream to refill our water bottles. I was sitting near the equipment, keeping watch, when Mike grabbed my arm. "Come look at this," he whispered. The electromagnetic field detector was showing a pattern, not a spike, a pattern. A wave that pulsed with an almost rhythmic quality. It would peak, then diminish, then peak again, like something breathing. "What would cause that?" Sarah asked, suddenly awake. "Nothing natural," Mike said. "You don't get patterns like that from geological activity. This looks almost like, I don't know, like someone's transmitting." We recorded the pattern for 40 minutes. Then it stopped. Just ended like someone switching off a light. Daniel returned with the water, his face pale. "I heard singing," he said, "down at the water. I heard music, but when I looked around, there was nothing there. The singing started at 1:33 a.m. It wasn't in our ears exactly. That's the part that was hardest to explain later. It was more like the sound was coming from inside the earth, resonating up through our bodies. It had melody. It had emotion. It had the quality of something ancient and lonely reaching across impossible distances for contact. Sarah actually cried, just tears running down her face while she listened to something that shouldn't exist. Mike stood up. "We need to leave," he said. "Now. This is wrong. We need to understand this first," I said. I was thinking like a scientist then, before I understood that some things aren't meant to be understood. Some things are just meant to be respected. We set up additional recording equipment. For 3 hours, we documented the singing. It would shift and change, almost as if it was responding to the sounds around us. When Mike moved, the melody shifted. When Sarah spoke, the rhythm altered. It was like the earth was learning our voices and trying to copy them. By the time dawn broke, we were all exhausted and changed. Not in a way you could see, but in a way you could feel. We'd heard something that proved the world was stranger than we thought. None of us knew how to process that. The walk back to the truck was quiet. Daniel kept looking back at the stone circle, even after we'd hiked away from it. His eyes had that hollow look of someone who'd glimpsed something bigger than himself. Mike was silent. His hands were shaking on the steering wheel as he drove. He kept shaking his head, like he could shake loose whatever he'd experienced in the darkness. Sarah sat in the back, just staring out the window. "It was reaching out," she said finally. "It was so alone. Whatever that is, it's been alone for so long." Back at the station, I called the university and asked for Dr. Morrison, the geology professor who'd partnered with us on previous projects. I didn't tell him everything. Not then. I just said we'd recorded some unusual acoustic phenomena and wanted his professional assessment. He agreed to come up the next weekend. That night, I tried to sleep in my small ranger house and couldn't. I kept hearing that singing, not in the environment around me, but in my memory, playing over and over. At some point, I realized I wasn't remembering the sound. It was actually still there, right at the edge of hearing, like it was reaching across the distance to find me. Dr. Morrison arrived on Saturday with 2 graduate assistants and a lot of equipment. He listened to our recordings and studied Daniel's data with intense focus. "This is impossible," he said. "These acoustic patterns shouldn't exist. The frequencies are wrong. The harmonic structures suggest conscious composition, but they violate every law of acoustic physics I understand." He wanted to investigate immediately. That's when things started accelerating. We spent Saturday night at the valley again. This time we brought more monitoring equipment, more cameras, more ways to capture whatever was happening. Dr. Morrison set up a thermal imaging camera pointed at the stone circle. Daniel had designed a new experiment. He played human sounds toward the circle, recordings of music and speech, and we documented if the singing changed in response. It did. The entity, and I was thinking of it as an entity by then, though I didn't say the word out loud, seemed to be learning. It would listen to our sounds and incorporate them into its own singing. A melody from a Bach piece would echo back transformed. Human speech would get woven into the acoustic patterns. But something else was happening. Sarah started having headaches. Not normal headaches. These seemed to be coming from inside her skull, like something was pressing against her thoughts. Daniel grew distant, distracted. He'd get this faraway look, like he was listening to something we couldn't hear. And Mike was getting worse. He barely slept. When he did, he'd wake up screaming from nightmares he couldn't remember. "We need to go," he kept saying. "Tim, we need to leave this place. We're close to understanding," I'd say. I was the one refusing to listen. I was the one pushing deeper into something I didn't comprehend. On Sunday afternoon, something changed. I was sitting about 20 yards from the stone circle when I noticed the way the light behaved differently. The sun was casting shadows, but the shadows didn't follow the rules. They seemed to move independently of their objects. A shadow would fall on the ground in one direction, then shift to another direction even though the object casting it hadn't moved. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see Daniel or Sarah. There was nothing there, no one, just forest. But the footsteps kept approaching. I could hear them clearly, the crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig. But there was nothing to see. The footsteps circled me, slowly, like something invisible was examining me. I felt the pressure then, that weight on my mind I'd been sensing since we arrived. It wasn't painful. It was almost like hands made of static electricity pressing against my consciousness. The footsteps stopped right in front of me. The pressure became intense. My vision blurred, and in that moment, I understood. The entity wasn't trying to hurt us. It was trying to make us understand. It was ancient, impossibly ancient. It had existed in that valley for longer than human civilization had existed anywhere on Earth. It had consciousness. It had loneliness. It had been bound there by something ancient and powerful, a binding that was slowly weakening over centuries. And it was desperate. Desperate for contact. Desperate to know if the world had changed. Desperate to speak to minds that could finally hear it. The pressure released. I stumbled backward, gasping like I'd been holding my breath. That's when Mike ran toward us from the camp, panic written across his face. We have to go. Right now.
Daniel won't wake up.
Daniel was unconscious in the tent, his body rigid, his eyes moving rapidly beneath his eyelids. His hands were curled into fists so tight his nails drew blood. We need medical help, Sarah said. There's no hospital that will understand this, I said quietly. And I was right. We carried Daniel out of that valley and got him to a hospital, but the doctors couldn't find anything physically wrong. No stroke, no seizure, no toxin. His brain scans were normal. He was just asleep, deeply asleep in some place none of us could reach. Dr. Morrison wanted to return immediately. This is the discovery of a lifetime, he kept saying. Conscious geological entity. Archaeological significance that rewrites everything we understand about consciousness in nature. Mike resigned. Just walked into my office Monday morning and said he was done. He couldn't explain why properly. He just said he felt watched in a way that made his skin crawl, like eyes were pressing against his back even when he was alone. Sarah wanted to stay. She wanted to understand the entity better, to find some way to help it communicate without causing harm. And I was torn between fear and fascination. I'd left the church because I thought organized religion had abandoned the real mystery of the world. Here was real mystery. Here was something that demanded to be understood. We went back on Wednesday. This time we brought less equipment and more open minds. Dr. Morrison came with Sarah and Daniel, who'd finally woken up. Daniel didn't remember anything from his sleep, but he said he felt different, like something had been downloaded directly into his consciousness. The valley felt different in daylight, less threatening, but more present, like it was waiting for us. We decided to do something dangerous. We decided to spend the night in the circle itself. I know how that sounds. It sounds insane. Probably because it was. But by that point, I wasn't thinking with the rational part of my mind that had kept me alive for 48 years. I was thinking with the part that had always known there was more to the world than we could measure and document. As darkness fell, we sat in the center of the stone circle. Just sat there in silence, with our monitors running, with our cameras recording, with our hearts pounding. The electromagnetic field readings started climbing as soon as the sun touched the horizon. They climbed and climbed until the meters couldn't register anymore. The air became charged. I could smell ozone, like lightning was building somewhere underground. Our hair stood on end. Every nerve in my body was screaming to run. Then the stones began to glow, not brightly, just a soft luminescence from within, like light was coming from inside the rock itself. The glow pulsed in rhythm with the electromagnetic waves. The singing started, but it was different now. It was structured. It was deliberate. It was every voice we'd ever heard, from every night we'd been there, woven into one coherent sound. It was saying something, speaking directly into our minds with pure meaning, unfolding images and concepts that had no words. I saw the valley as it had been. I saw the binding ceremony, ancient people, the Cherokee ancestors, performing a ritual to contain something that had threatened to consume the land itself. I felt their fear. I felt their determination. I felt the power they'd used to imprison a consciousness that was both benevolent and dangerous. The way of fire is both warming and destructive. I saw the entity itself, not as a creature or a person, but as a force, ancient beyond measure, aware and intelligent and incomprehensibly lonely. It had been watching humanity grow up in the world, watching from its prison, wanting contact but too dangerous to release. It showed me the binding weakening. The ritual was thousands of years old. Magic, actual magic, the technology of consciousness that ancient people had understood, was becoming unstable. Within a century, perhaps less, the binding would fail completely. Then something changed. The entity shifted its attention to me specifically, and I felt its question, like hands on my mind, pressing and asking, "What should I do? I do not want to hurt your people, but I do not want to remain imprisoned. What is right?" The pressure became overwhelming. My consciousness felt like it was being torn apart. Sarah grabbed my arm, and I could see she was experiencing something similar. Pain and pressure and a question too big for a human mind to hold. Daniel screamed. Just a raw sound of agony as the entity tried to speak to him, tried to make him understand something that wasn't meant for human understanding. Dr. Morrison was standing, backing away from the stones, his face white. "We have to break the connection," he shouted. "Move outside the circle." But I couldn't move, because the entity wasn't trying to hurt us. It was trying to make us understand that it didn't want to hurt anyone. It was trying to say that it was afraid, that it needed to know it wouldn't destroy everything when the binding failed. I made a choice then. I opened my mind to it completely. I let it pour into my consciousness like floodwater, and I tried to think at it, not with words, but with meaning. I tried to show it compassion. I tried to show it that there were people in the world who understood isolation, who understood the weight of consciousness that had nowhere to go. The pressure released so suddenly I fell backward. The glow from the stones faded. The singing diminished. The electromagnetic fields collapsed. Silence. Perfect. Complete silence. Daniel was unconscious again. Sarah was crying, her nose bleeding from the pressure. Dr. Morrison was shaking so hard he could barely stand. I helped them out of the circle, and we stumbled down the trail in darkness. I don't remember much about that walk. My mind was flooded with impressions and concepts that I'm still trying to process years later. But I remember the feeling of the entity settling back into its prison, exhausted and discouraged, resigned to waiting for the binding to fail completely. And underneath that, I felt gratitude. The entity was grateful that we'd tried to understand. Daniel woke up in the hospital 3 days later. He had no permanent damage, but something in him had changed. He eventually switched his focus from geology to philosophy, studying the question of consciousness in the natural world. Last I heard, he was teaching at a university in California. Sarah stayed with the Forest Service. She became an advocate for protecting sensitive natural areas, though she never officially explained why certain places were more important than others. She just knew. The entity had taught her that. Dr. Morrison filed an official report citing unusual electromagnetic phenomena and equipment malfunction. The valley was closed to public access for environmental protection. That was the cover story. The real story got locked away in university archives, filed under restricted access, where it can't trouble anyone's understanding of how the world works. I took medical leave for 2 months. The doctors ran every test they could think of. I was fine. Physically, I was completely fine. Psychologically, I was changed. When I returned to work, I put in my retirement papers. The regional office was concerned about my judgment. I'd put my team in danger, pursued something without proper caution, let a graduate student get severely hurt. By the usual standards of ranger work, I'd failed. But I knew the truth. I'd made contact with something real, and that contact had changed what I understood about the world. The valley remained closed. Occasionally, on my own time, I'd hike in and leave monitoring equipment overnight. The electromagnetic readings continue to fluctuate. The singing happens less often now, but it still happens. The binding is definitely weakening. I've spent my post-retirement years studying consciousness, spirituality, and the possibility that the natural world is far more alive than we've acknowledged. I counsel people who claim to have encountered strange phenomena in nature, because I understand now that many of them are telling the truth. Mike won't talk to me. I saw him once in a grocery store 5 years ago, and he walked the other way. The memory of that place had damaged something in him that never fully healed. Sometimes I think about that entity, locked beneath the Blue Ridge Mountains, waiting for a binding to fail. I wonder if it's still reaching out, still singing on quiet nights to anyone who might listen. I wonder if I should do something to help it when the binding finally fails. And I know what it means when people report hearing music near old stone formations, or feeling watched in certain places, or experiencing overwhelming emotion in natural spaces. I know now that we live in a world far more conscious than we admit. We share this planet with intelligences we don't have names for, trapped and waiting in the places where time stands still. If you ever hear singing in a stone circle, my advice is simple. Don't try to help. Don't try to understand. Just respect the boundary and move away. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved by human hands. Some doors, once cracked open, should probably stay locked, but the locks are failing. Everywhere I look, I see the signs. The ancient bindings are weakening, and I spend many nights wondering what will happen to the world when the stones finally start singing freely. I think about that entity often. I think about its loneliness and its power and the question it asked me in the darkness. I still don't have an answer. My name is Louise Garrett, but everyone calls me Lou. I'm a forest ranger for the Appalachian National Forest in Kentucky, and I've been doing this job for 18 years. I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghost stories or supernatural stuff. I believe in facts. I believe in what I can see and measure. I grew up in these mountains, My father was a coal miner until a collapse took him when I was 7 years old. I joined the Forest Service because I wanted to be useful, to help people, and to stay out of those dark tunnels where my father died. In June of 1996, I was 45 years old and good at what I did. I could read the land like a book. I could track people, find the lost, and figure out when something wasn't right in these mountains. I had 2 rangers working with me, Dave Murphy, a good young man in his mid-30s, and Angie Cole, a smart woman in her late 20s who didn't take anything on faith. We ran the ranger station near Harlan, Kentucky, about 12 miles south of the old abandoned mining territories. The weather that June was strange. The heat sat on the mountains like a blanket someone had thrown over your head. The humidity made it hard to breathe. Even the animals seemed off. The birds were quiet in the mornings, and you could see the raccoons acting confused, like they didn't know which way was home. I'd mention it to Dave and Angie sometimes, and they'd nod but not say much. We were all just trying to do our jobs. The real trouble started with a phone call from Sarah Henderson. Her husband Bobby had been missing for 3 weeks. Sarah came to the station one afternoon, and I could see the fear in her eyes right away. Not the normal fear of my husband went hiking and got lost. This was something different. Bobby was a miner a former miner. The coal industry had collapsed in our region, and most of the men couldn't find work anymore. Bobby had been doing odd jobs, staying close to home. He'd gone out to check on some old equipment near the sealed-off mines, and he never came back. Then, 5 days later, he walked out of the forest like nothing had happened. Sarah said that Bobby looked fine at first. No injuries, no signs of being hurt or scared, but something was wrong. When she asked him where he'd been, he just stared at her like she was speaking in a language he didn't understand. Eventually he said, "I was sleeping. That was it. No explanation of where. No memory of 3 weeks passing." When I interviewed Bobby, I understood what Sarah meant. He was there, but he wasn't there. His eyes didn't focus quite right. When I asked him questions, there was always a delay before he answered. Like he had to think about how humans talk before he could do it. His wife said the worst part was that when he looked at their kids, there was no recognition, no love, nothing. She said it was like looking at a stranger wearing her husband's skin. I told myself it was stress, mental breakdown from long-term unemployment, maybe mixed with something worse, substance abuse, maybe some kind of drug problem. I documented everything and filed the report. We'd see what happened. Then 2 more people came back in almost the same condition. Marcus Webb, a guy who used to work the deep shafts, walked out of the forest on a Tuesday morning. Disappeared 10 days earlier. Came back wrong. Then Jennifer Cole, no relation to my ranger Angie, vanished while hiking and returned 4 days later with no memory of where she'd been. She just kept saying, "It was dark and I was sleeping." All 3 of them had been near the old mining territories. All 3 had changed in exactly the same way. Empty eyes, delayed reactions, no memory, and this strange emotional flatness, like someone had drained all their feelings out and left just the body behind. The community started to get scared. Harlan County had lost so much already. The coal mines had shut down. The economy had dried up. Young people were leaving. Families were falling apart from poverty and desperation. And now this. Now their own people were coming back wrong. An old woman named Martha Garrett, no relation, but we joked about it, came to see me. Martha had lived through the big mine disaster in 1972 when an explosion killed 42 men. She told me stories that I'd dismissed as old folklore. She said that not all the bodies from the 1972 explosion had ever been found. She said that some of the miners who did come back after the disaster were different. They worked for a few months and then disappeared into the mountains. No one ever found them. Something woke up down there when the explosion happened, Martha told me, sitting in my office with her weathered hands folded in her lap. The old miners used to say there was something living in the deep places, something that was sleeping. The explosion woke it up. I listened respectfully. I even made notes, but I didn't believe her. I believed in facts and psychology, not in stories about things living in mines. I was wrong. On the 6th day after the first strange return, I decided to investigate the mining area myself. I took my pickup truck about 8 miles north from the station, parked at the old access road, and hiked into the territory. The landscape there was scarred, bare earth and rocks where the strip mining had torn away everything. Trees were growing back, but they looked thin and weak, like they didn't want to be there. The ground was still contaminated with chemicals and minerals, and the water that seeped from the broken earth was rust-colored and wrong-smelling. The abandoned mines created valleys and strange dips in the land. Metal structures from old equipment still stood in places, rusted and broken. The summer heat made everything shimmer and wavered in the distance. I could hear water dripping somewhere. Always water in the old mines, seeping through, poisoning the ground. I found where Bobby Henderson had likely been, near a large sealed entrance that we'd officially barricaded years ago. The concrete barrier was still there, but around it, I noticed something unusual. The ground near the entrance was disturbed. Rocks had been moved, and there was a smell, old and earthy, like something had been breathing out of that hole for a long time. I pushed against the seal. It held, but I could see that something had been digging around the edges. Something had been working at it from the inside. That night, I set up a surveillance camera, small, battery-powered, outside the sealed entrance. I wanted to know if anything was coming out of that mine. I told Dave I was doing wildlife monitoring. I didn't mention what I really thought I'd find. At 2:47 a.m., my camera caught something. A figure emerged from around the concrete seal, apparently from a gap I hadn't seen. The image was grainy and dark, but I could see enough. The person moved wrong. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like someone learning how to operate a body for the first time. No human being moves like that. Then more figures came out, 5 of them, standing in the darkness, not moving, just standing. The camera recorded for 7 minutes straight. The figures stood in absolute silence and stillness. Then together, all at the same time, they turned and walked back down toward where the mine entrance must be. I watched that video footage a dozen times. My hands were shaking the whole time. The next day, I went back to the mine entrance alone. I didn't tell Dave or Angie. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I could explain it to anyone else. I found the gap in the seal. Someone had carefully removed concrete blocks from the bottom and stacked them nearby. The opening was maybe 2 feet across. I could see into darkness beyond. I had a flashlight, a radio, and a pistol. I was a trained law enforcement officer. I was armed and trained for emergencies. None of that would have mattered against what I was about to meet. I squeezed through the opening. The mine shaft descended into blackness. My flashlight created a narrow tunnel of yellow light in the darkness. The air smelled like wet earth and something else. Something chemical and wrong. My breathing echoed off the stone walls. I went down for maybe 50 yards, then found a larger chamber. This was where someone had been living. There was a sleeping area made of blankets and cushions, food containers, empty cans, plastic packages, a fire pit, cold but used recently. And something that made my skin crawl, a collection of personal items arranged carefully on a flat stone. Photographs, documents, a wedding ring. These were things from the 1972 mine disaster. These were things that should have been burned up in an explosion 24 years ago. I was photographing everything with a small camera when I heard it. A sound from deeper in the mine. Not an animal sound. Almost like a voice, but not words. More like a frequency. A tone that you felt in your chest more than heard with your ears, than the figures. They emerged from the darkness beyond my flashlight's reach. I could see their shapes but not their faces. They moved together, perfectly coordinated, like they were all parts of the same body. "Don't move," I said. I pulled my pistol. "Stay where you are." They kept walking toward me. Their movement was absolutely silent. No footsteps, no breathing. Just the soft scrape of bodies moving through darkness. I recognized one of them, Bobby Henderson. "Bobby," I said. "Bobby, stop. I'm a ranger. I need you to stop and talk to me." He didn't stop. None of them did. They surrounded me. I should have been terrified. I should have run. But what I felt was worse than fear. I felt something touching my mind. Not physically. Something was pressing against my consciousness, examining it like a doctor examining a patient. I felt it looking through my thoughts, touching my memories, testing my mind's defenses. It hurt. The pressure built until I couldn't think straight, until all I could do was run. I turned and ran for the mine entrance. Behind me, I heard that sound again, that non-language frequency that vibrated through my bones. I made it to the opening and squeezed through. I ran all the way back to my truck, gasping for breath, my mind feeling raw and exposed. When I got back to the ranger station, Dave took one look at my face and knew something had happened. I told them I'd found evidence of living quarters in the sealed mine. I didn't tell them about the figures or what I felt when they got close. I didn't tell them about the feeling of something touching my thoughts. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. Over the next 3 days, everything got worse. I kept records. 3 more missing persons emerged from the territory, all returning changed in exactly the same way. All of them had been near the sealed mines. All of them came back hollow. I searched the database of missing persons going back to 1972. There were more than I expected. At least 30 cases, scattered across the years, but clustering around the anniversary of the mine explosion each summer. Dave and Angie were starting to worry about me. I wasn't sleeping. I was spending all my time documenting everything. I knew how I looked, obsessed, maybe unbalanced. A ranger turning into a conspiracy theorist about a haunted mine. The problem was, I was right. On day 9, I set up cameras at multiple locations around the mining area. I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. What I got was worse. The footage from the second camera, positioned to catch the open field around the mine entrance, showed something I still can't fully explain. Approximately 15 figures, moving in perfect formation, walking across the open ground at night. They moved like water, coordinated, purposeful, impossible, and they were naked. The footage was clear enough to see that these were human bodies. But the way they moved, the way they held themselves, the way they turned in unison, that wasn't human. I recognized at least 5 of them: Bobby Henderson, Marcus Webb, Jennifer Cole, and 2 others I'd seen missing person reports about. People who'd vanished years ago, still wearing faces they'd stolen from people the community had loved. I called Dave and Angie into my office and showed them the footage. "What am I looking at?" Angie asked. "I don't know," I said. "But it's real. That's real footage." Dave was quiet. Then he said, "Lou, we need to talk to the regional office. You need to talk to someone about what you've been through." "I'm not crazy," I said. "I'm not saying you are," Dave said. But he exchanged a look with Angie that told me they thought exactly that. That night, I went back to the mine. I needed answers. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. And I needed to understand why those figures had tried to get into my mind. I went alone. I took a stronger flashlight, more equipment, and I went deeper than I had before. The second chamber was larger. There were more sleeping areas, enough space for dozens of people. And in the center of the chamber, there was evidence of ritual or ceremony. A circle drawn on the stone floor, stones arranged in patterns, and on the walls, marks that might have been writing or art. Then I heard the sound again, but this time I understood it better. It was coming from even deeper, from below, from the core of the mine. I descended further. The deeper I went, the colder it became. The air changed. It became thick and hard to breathe. My flashlight started to flicker, the battery draining faster than it should have. Electrical interference, I realized. Something electrical was interfering with the equipment. Then I felt it. A presence. Not physical, but absolutely real. A consciousness. A mind that was vast and distributed and utterly alien. It was examining me again, but this time I could almost understand what it wanted. It was curious. A voice spoke in my mind. Not words, but concepts. Images. Emotions that weren't mine. Consciousness. Individual. Separate. Beautiful, that's what it felt like. The entity was fascinated by humans. By individual consciousness. By the fact that each human mind was trapped in its own perspective, alone and separate. It wanted to collect them. It wanted to gather human consciousness into itself, not to destroy them, but to understand them, to absorb the experience of being individual, of being alone in your own mind. And it had found that by occupying a human body, by overlaying a partial consciousness over the human brain, it could create a hybrid being that was both human and something else. A body that could move in the human world while serving the entity's purpose. I tried to back away, but the presence followed me, or I went deeper toward it. I'm not sure anymore. The distinction between moving toward it and being pulled toward it became blurry. Then came the collapse. The mine shuddered. Rock fell. The whole structure groaned around me. The figures appeared again, moving toward me with those jerky, unnatural movements. I could see their faces this time. They were wrong. The features were right. Eyes, nose, mouth. But they were arranged wrong. Like someone who'd learned about human faces from a book but had never actually seen one. I ran. Rocks fell behind me. The passage narrowed. I scraped my shoulder raw against the stone. My flashlight went dark, and I navigated by touch and by panic. I made it to the opening and fell through it, crawling on my hands and knees into the night air. The mine behind me collapsed. The seal, the opening, all of it fell inward with a sound like thunder rolling underground. I lay on the ground, gasping, and realized something. I'd survived. But I'd also succeeded in doing something to the mine. I'd blocked it, created a barrier between the surface and whatever lay below. I didn't remember collapsing the mine intentionally, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that something had made me do it, that the entity itself had guided my actions. Dave found me an hour later, unconscious on the ground near the sealed entrance. The hospital kept me for 2 months. I had broken ribs, a concussion, cuts and bruises that would have looked worse on a person less tough than me. But the physical injuries weren't the real problem. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with my mind. I couldn't sleep without nightmares. I couldn't quiet my thoughts. And I kept experiencing moments where I felt like there was something else in my head with me. something examining my thoughts, trying to understand what it meant to be me. The psychiatric evaluation concluded that I'd suffered severe trauma and stress-induced psychological breakdown. They recommended extended medical leave and therapy. They suggested I might not be fit for ranger work anymore. No one believed me about the entity. No one believed me about the figures emerging from the mine. The collapse was attributed to natural structural instability. Old mines are dangerous, after all. The sealed mine entrance became a restricted zone, off limits to everyone. The government declared it a geological hazard and reinforced the barrier with concrete and warnings. But I knew the truth. The entity wasn't dead. It wasn't destroyed. It was trapped, yes. The collapse had cut off the deep chambers where its consciousness was concentrated. But it still had access to the people it controlled. The 47 people whose consciousness it had already overlaid. And those people were still out there. I tried to tell the authorities. I tried to explain what I'd found, what I'd experienced. Dave and Angie listened, but I could see they didn't really believe me. They thought I was having a breakdown, that the trauma of the mine collapse had broken something in my mind. Maybe they were right. When I was released from the hospital, I was no longer a field ranger. I was put in administrative work, desk duty, filing reports about other rangers' work instead of doing my own. I spent the next 3 years in that position, documenting everything I'd learned, recording interviews with the people who'd returned, changed from the mine. Some of them, slowly, over months and years, began to show signs of their original consciousness returning. Their eyes would focus. They'd recognize their families. They'd remember who they were. But not all of them recovered, and occasionally new people would disappear near the mine. The authorities dismissed each case separately. Missing hikers, voluntary disappearances, suicides. Each one filed away as unrelated to the others, but I knew they were all connected. In 1998, I retired from the Forest Service. Medically discharged, my career ending not with honor, but with questions about whether I was stable enough to carry a badge and a gun. I moved into a small house near Harlan and became an unofficial caretaker for the affected families and the partial victims of the entity. I worked with therapists and doctors to help the people who'd returned from the mine recover themselves. Some of them did. Most of them carried permanent marks from their time below. Emotional absence, memory gaps, a sense of having survived something they couldn't explain. I visited the sealed mine regularly. I watched for signs of the barrier failing, because I knew it would fail eventually. The entity was patient. It had been sleeping in that mine for possibly millions of years before we woke it with an explosion in 1972. It could wait. It could gather its human hosts and grow stronger. And when the seal finally broke, whether that took 50 years or 100, it would emerge fully into the world. I'm writing this because I'm dying. The injury from the mine collapse combined with a lifetime of smoking and stress has given me lung cancer. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months. I've spent those 6 months gathering my documentation, writing everything down, recording interviews, making sure that someone, someday, would know the truth about what happened in Harlan County. The sealed mine still stands. The barrier still holds. But I've noticed small changes, water seeping around the edges. Sounds on quiet nights, that same frequency I heard underground, resonating faintly even through concrete and stone. The barrier will hold for now, maybe for decades. But time doesn't matter to something that has already waited millions of years. The people the entity controlled, those 47 people, most of them are still alive. Some have recovered their consciousness almost completely. Others carry permanent hollowness in their eyes. And a few of them, I suspect, were never truly recovered at all. They just learned to hide better, to appear human while remaining connected to the vast distributed consciousness of the thing beneath the mountain. If you're reading this and you're from Harlan County, or anywhere near an old mining region, you need to know. If someone disappears and then comes back, and they seem empty, if their eyes don't focus, if they move wrong, if they don't remember where they've been, don't assume it's mental illness or drug use. Look deeper, because something that isn't human is walking around in a human body. And each day it remains on the surface, the more danger we're all in. The sealed mine is a temporary solution. A temporary cage. The thing that lives below doesn't sleep anymore, and it doesn't forget. When the barrier fails, and it will fail, we'll see something that shouldn't be possible. Dozens of people, maybe hundreds by then, moving in perfect coordination. No individual thoughts, no separate consciousness, just a distributed intelligence wearing stolen bodies. My name is Louise Garrett. I was a ranger in Harlan County. I failed to stop this. All I could do was slow it down. All I can do now is warn you. Pay attention to the hollow-eyed people in your community. Watch the old mines. And remember, coal mines don't belong to us. Something was sleeping down there long before we came with our shovels and our explosions. We woke it up. Now it wears our faces. My name is Samuel Whitmore, and I need to tell you what happened at Red Run Gap before someone else dies trying to understand it. I've been a ranger for 22 years. That might not sound like much to some people, but out in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, 22 years means you've seen things change. You've watched forests grow back after fires. You've tracked animal populations. You've learned to read the land like most people read books. Before I was a ranger, I was a biologist. I had a fancy degree from the University of Pennsylvania and dreams of doing important research. But then life happened. Family problems, money issues, the kind of stuff that makes you take a different path. I joined the Forest Service because I wanted to use what I knew in a practical way. I wanted to actually help, not just write papers that nobody reads. I'm good at what I do. I understand animal behavior. I know how predators hunt, how prey survives. I understand ecosystems, how everything connects and depends on everything else. I'm the kind of person who believes what I can see and test. I don't believe in things that can't be explained by science. I believe in evolution, genetics, biology. I believe the natural world makes sense if you study it long enough. That's important to understand about who I was before July 1995. Red Run Gap isn't the kind of place most people visit. It's a valley in the Monongahela, tucked between high ridges, with maybe one rough road in and out. The gap gets its name from Red Run Creek, which cuts through the valley and has water that's slightly reddish from mineral deposits. The rock formations are unusual, lots of exposed quartz, weird geological layers that don't quite match the rest of the forest. The elevation ranges from 2,000 to over 3,600 feet, and the terrain is rough, steep, difficult to move through if you don't know what you're doing. I've worked out of the Red Run Gap Ranger Station for 6 years. It's a small building, office space, a little lab where I do basic wildlife work, a radio setup. My deputy ranger, Ed Morrison, had been with me for 9 years. Ed was a good man, careful, experienced, the kind of person you want next to you when things go wrong. In early July, the reports started coming in. Hikers would come down from the gap and ask to speak with me. They'd describe seeing deer that moved wrong, limbs that bent at angles deer limbs shouldn't bend, animals that seemed to flicker, like they'd disappear for a second and then be back again. Most of the hikers were scared. Not just I saw something weird, scared, actually scared. The kind of fear that doesn't make sense because they were just talking about deer. I listened to them politely. I noted the details. I told them it was probably a young deer with a developmental issue, or maybe they'd seen a predator and mistaken it for a deer. Animals can look wrong when you're frightened or when the light isn't good. I'd seen it before. People's minds playing tricks. But then we found the bodies. The first one was near Miller's Trail, about 2 miles into the gap. It was a white-tailed deer, but something was obviously wrong with it. Ed called the station, and I drove out to look. The deer had been dead for maybe 3 days. What got me wasn't how it died. I couldn't tell what killed it. What got me was how it was built. I knelt down to examine it, and I felt something I can't quite explain. A kind of pressure in my chest, a sense that I should leave. I've never felt anything like it before or since. It was like my body was warning me about something my mind didn't understand yet. The deer's legs were too long. Not just a little long, there was something wrong with the joints. The knees bent in a way that seemed to have an extra articulation point. The spine showed extra vertebrae. The muscles had attached to the bones at angles that didn't make anatomical sense. I took samples back to the lab. Tissue, bone, blood. I wanted to find a disease, a parasite, something that explained the deformities, something reasonable. That's when everything started to go wrong. The lab work was strange. The cellular samples degraded faster than normal. The genetic material looked like it was pulling apart, separating into components that shouldn't separate. Under the microscope, the cells looked almost like 2 different things were trying to exist in the same space. I told Ed I needed to collect more samples. I told him we had a potential wildlife crisis on our hands. He agreed, though I noticed he didn't seem happy about it. We set out early one morning, July 15th, heading into the gap on foot. The forest was beautiful that day, green and thick, the kind of July heat that makes the air shimmer. We hiked for about 3 hours before we found the second body. This one was fresher, maybe a day old, and this one, Ed and I both felt it, that horrible pressure, that sense of wrongness. Ed's face went pale. I asked him if he was okay, and he said yes, but I could tell he was lying. We collected samples, and I photographed the body from different angles. When I looked at the photos later, something weird showed up. In some pictures, the deer looked solid, normal. In others, it looked transparent. Like it was half there that shouldn't happen. A camera either captures something or it doesn't. We found 2 more bodies over the next week. Same deformities. Same weird feeling standing near them. Same impossible photographic results. The bodies were scattered across the gap, which meant this wasn't isolated. Multiple animals were affected. Then the 3rd week of July, a hiker came into the station in the middle of the afternoon. He was shaking. He'd been on a trail near the northern ridge when he encountered what he described as a herd of deer, but they were wrong. He said they were moving together, like they were coordinated. He said they were moving toward him, not away. He said their joints moved in impossible ways. He said when he looked at them directly, he could almost see through them. He said he'd never been so terrified in his life, and he'd experienced real danger before. Most importantly, he said when he finally ran, he heard them following him. He heard sounds like they were communicating with each other. Sounds that weren't normal deer vocalizations. Sounds with strange frequencies that almost hurt to hear. That's when I stopped thinking about disease and started thinking about something else. I didn't say anything to Ed yet, but I started researching. I went into the ranger station's archives and pulled out old reports, records going back to the 1920s. What I found made me read everything twice. There were reports from 1923 about animals that move wrong in the gap. A ranger's report from 1945 actually used the phrase, "not deer," that exact phrase. The ranger described creatures that looked like deer but moved like nothing in nature should move. Creatures that appeared and disappeared. The report said the ranger had seen their joints bend at angles that made him feel physically sick. Then there was a report from 1967. This ranger had actually filmed the creatures with a movie camera. The footage was supposedly lost years ago, but the written description detailed animals that became transparent on film. Animals that flickered between being visible and invisible. The ranger had written that watching them made him question whether he understood reality. The dates hit me hard. 1923, 1945, 1967. If there was a pattern, the next occurrence would be around 1989 or 1990. We were already past that. We were at the peak of a cycle. I drove to the nearest town and found an elderly woman named Margaret, who'd lived near Red Run Gap her whole life. She was 92 years old and sharp as a knife. I asked her what she knew about the not deer. She looked at me for a long time. Then she told me. Her grandmother had told her stories about the not deer when she was a child. The not deer were things from another place. They didn't belong to our world, but sometimes they could push into it. They lived in the gap because something about the gap made it easier for them to cross over. They weren't evil, exactly, but they were so foreign, so completely unlike anything that belonged in our world, that encountering them could break a person's mind. "You see something that's too wrong," Margaret said. "Your brain can't process it. Some people get sick, some people go crazy, some people just die because their hearts give out from the fear." I wanted to dismiss it as folklore, the old stories people tell to explain things they don't understand. But I'd seen the specimens, I'd taken the photos, I'd read the ranger reports, and I had a feeling, a deep, certain feeling, that Margaret was telling me something true. August arrived. The reports increased. More hikers encountered the creatures, more animals died, and the encounters were getting closer to populated areas. 2 of the sightings were within a mile of the ranger station. Ed was falling apart. He wasn't sleeping. I could see it in his face, in how he moved. He'd become jumpy, startled by small noises. I suggested he take some time off, but he refused. He said he wasn't going to leave me alone out here. But the truth was, he wanted to leave. He wanted to run. On August 10th, we found a human body. It was a hiker named Thomas Chen. He'd been reported missing by his hiking group 3 days earlier. We found him on a high ridge, partially covered by brush. The first thing I noticed was his face. His eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. His mouth was open like he was trying to scream. He'd been dead for at least 2 days. There were no wounds, no marks, no sign of physical injury. But his heart had stopped. The coroner would later say it was cardiac arrest. The probable cause was extreme fear and stress. I knew what he'd seen before he died. Ed stopped talking after that. He'd sit in the station and just stare at nothing. When I asked him questions, he'd answer in monosyllables. I was worried about him, but I was also obsessed with understanding what was happening. I set up an observation post near the location where most of the sightings were concentrated. A valley about 3 miles from the station, accessible by hiking. I brought recording equipment, cameras, sample containers. I was going to document everything. August 15th, I hiked out to the observation post in the late afternoon. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no insects, just the sound of the creek and my own footsteps. I set up my equipment and waited. Around sunset, they arrived. There were maybe 30 of them, filtering into the valley from different directions. At first, they moved like normal deer, but then the movement changed. It became coordinated, synchronized, like each creature was controlled by the same mind. Then I saw them clearly. They were shaped like deer, 4 legs, body, head, tail, but the proportions were off. The legs were longer than they should be. The joints had too many angles. The bodies seemed to shimmer and shift, like they existed between states, and I could see through them. It wasn't complete transparency. It was more like looking at them through water that kept changing the clarity. One moment I could see them clearly. The next moment they looked like ghosts. Then solid again. I raised my camera with shaking hands and took pictures. The creatures became aware of me. They turned, and I felt that pressure again, that overwhelming sense of dread. It radiated from them like heat. One of them approached slowly. I couldn't move. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't obey my brain. The creature came within 10 feet of me, and I realized something that changed everything I believed about reality. The creature was intelligent. It looked at me like I was a puzzle it was trying to solve. I could feel something touching my mind, not physically, but consciously. Like another consciousness was pushing against mine, trying to understand me the way I was trying to understand it. I received impressions, not words, not images exactly, just concepts, different. Barrier thin, world close, we reach, we study, you run away, we stay. Both real, that's the best way I can describe it. The creature made a sound, a vocalization that started like a normal deer call but twisted into something that hurt my ears. The other creatures responded with the same sound, and suddenly I understood. They were communicating. These things could share information between their minds. I finally managed to move. I stood up and backed away slowly. The creatures didn't chase me. They watched me leave with what I can only describe as curiosity. I ran. I ran all the way back to the station and burst through the door. Ed was sitting at the desk, and when he saw me, he stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "You saw them," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "We have to leave," he said immediately. "We have to leave right now." "No," I said. "We need to understand what they are. They're not from here, Sam. You know that. They're from somewhere else. Somewhere wrong. We're not meant to understand them. We're just meant to stay away from them." But I couldn't stay away. The next morning, Ed told me he was requesting a transfer. He was done. He was scared. And he was getting out. I didn't try to stop him. I understood. He left that afternoon, and I didn't see him again for weeks. Alone at the station, I became obsessed. I studied everything. The old reports, the folklore, my own observations and samples. I developed a theory that seemed insane, but it was the only explanation that fit all the evidence. The creatures came from a dimension adjacent to ours. Another reality that existed next to this one. Similar but fundamentally different. The geological features of Red Run Gap, the quartz deposits, the unique mineral composition, the geological formation, created a weak point in the barrier between dimensions. A place where the boundary got thin enough for creatures from the other side to partially manifest in our world. They weren't invaders. They weren't trying to conquer or harm us. They were explorers. They were studying us the way I studied animals. We were as alien to them as they were to us, and that mutual alienness was terrifying. But I had to know more. In late August, I deliberately hiked back to that valley with the intention of making contact. I brought no weapons, no defensive equipment, just myself and a notebook. I walked into the open and waited. It took maybe 20 minutes. They approached from the tree line, this time maybe 40 of them. They surrounded me in a loose circle. I could feel their attention focused on me with an intensity that was almost physical. I sat down slowly and opened my mind. I want to understand too, I thought, trying to project the feeling. The pressure came back, stronger this time, and suddenly I could see. I could see Red Run Gap as it existed in their dimension. The valley was the same shape, but everything else was different. The trees were there, but their colors were wrong. Too many colors I didn't have names for. The sky was a color I'd never seen before. The light came from a different source. The physics of the place was fundamentally altered. The perspective kept shifting. Distances seemed to change based on how I thought about them. I was perceiving two realities at once. My body started to hurt. My limbs felt like they were pulling apart. My vision split between the forest I knew and the alien landscape. I could feel my consciousness trying to exist in both places at the same time, and it was tearing me apart. I was going to die. I could feel it happening. My human mind wasn't built to process this much reality at once. It was breaking down. Then someone grabbed me. Ed, he'd come back. He'd followed me, and when he saw what was happening, he physically pulled me out of the circle, breaking the contact. The other reality snapped away. I gasped, and for several minutes I couldn't see properly. The world seemed flat and wrong, like looking at a photograph instead of reality. Ed held on to me until I could focus again. "We're leaving," he said, "both of us. Now." This time I didn't argue. I spent a week in the hospital with neurological symptoms that the doctors couldn't explain. Partial paralysis, visual disturbances, periods of confusion, but I recovered. The human brain is adaptable. It adjusts. What I couldn't adjust to was the knowledge that reality was so much bigger than I'd believed. I returned to the station, but I was changed. I remained a ranger, but my focus changed completely. I made it my mission to protect Red Run Gap. I issued warnings about dangerous wildlife. I restricted access. I kept rangers away from the valley. I documented everything I observed about the creatures and their cycles, because they do cycle. Every 20 to 25 years, the barrier between dimensions gets thin enough for them to manifest strongly. It lasts about 2 years. Then they fade back, and we get a long period of relative quiet. The scientific community didn't believe me. I tried to publish my findings, but no journal would touch them. Other scientists dismissed me. My colleagues thought I'd had some kind of breakdown. In a way I had, but not the kind they thought. I stayed. I built my life around understanding and protecting the boundary between worlds. I trained new rangers to recognize the signs without understanding what they meant. I kept Red Run Gap safe by keeping people away from it. And every few years, when the cycle came around, I'd hike out to the valley and sit with them. Not for long, just enough to observe. Just enough to understand a little more. They never hurt me after that first contact. I'd touch the boundary of their reality, and they'd show me things. Colors that don't exist in our world. Concepts that our language can't describe. An understanding that consciousness itself exists in different forms, in different dimensions, each one as real and valid as our own. I still don't fully understand them. I'm not sure it's possible for a human to fully understand something so fundamentally foreign. But I've accepted what they are. They've accepted what I am. If you're reading this, there's something you need to know. Red Run Gap is a real place. The creatures are real. And there are other places like it. Thin points where the barriers between worlds wear thin. Places where you might encounter something that your mind isn't equipped to process. If you see something moving wrong in the forest. If you see joints bending at angles they shouldn't. If you see something that looks almost like a deer but fills you with overwhelming terror. Don't run. Don't try to fight. Just back away slowly. Don't let them see your fear, because they can taste it, and their curiosity about human consciousness can destroy a human mind. Some things exist outside of our normal understanding of life and evolution. Some realities exist adjacent to our own. Some knowledge once gained can never be unknown. Red Run Gap taught me that.